Hello, Dane. In this conversation, I want to review our relationship with the channel or channeled entity Lazaris, and then look at what I might do differently doing it over again. So, as you know, age 11 or 12, we first explored or came into contact with Lazaris. That thought process of kind of wading through the pros and cons was solid. Later in Missouri, again, I think a solid reason to connect with Lazaris. Becoming perhaps the biggest influence in our lives in terms of numbers of hours listening to one source of inspiration in teens and 20s. And then in the later, we met our first girlfriend at age 26, Alicia, and then at age 28 separated. And at that point, I discovered some workshops on relationship practices and sexuality that proved far more useful than the somewhat clunky and dysfunctional efforts to make Lazaris programs on relationships, love, or intimacy work in that relationship with another Lazaris friend. And then prior to that, we bought, probably, $40,000 or $50,000 of crystals from Concept Synergy, discovering the sensitivity we have to crystal energy. And then I went through a period of basically saying that by Lazaris' own standard, which is kind of the bedrock, is that the focus of a life is to learn to consciously create success and consciously create fun. Well, it turned out that the success that I was having at consciously creating fun was way higher outside of the Lazaris circle rather than in. So that was paradoxical and somewhat unsatisfying to follow a Lazaris teaching away from Lazaris and the Lazaris community. This is also an unpopular course. It was a bit of a bumpy ride with the Jack and Lazaris forum. And so for about 10 years, Lazaris was an occasional background thought, but not a major force, and a dissatisfying force, meaning it is dissatisfying, to find how ineffective so many of the Lazaris protocols seem to be at creating success and at creating fun. Not only in our life, but in the lives of many Lazaris friends. So that is, that took us until maybe age 42, 43. So a good 10-year break there. Now, at that point, a major trauma happened that ruptured my connection with the community that I'd learned about relationships and sexuality, etc., with. And so that rupture simultaneously creates a void, but it also points out that there are major shortcomings in that teaching, right? Because it turned out to be, an instructor, Peter Sandhill, that, just played out a script of kind of reenacted childhood abuse, sexual abuse in, it's kind of like a fairy tale, a dark fairy tale. And, if that's the teacher, and then if the other, what happened is the other teachers colluded to hide the story rather than to provide help to the community or to the victim of therapeutic and sexual abuse. So that was an incredibly painful and confusing period. And so what had been looking like a relatively good alternative and a positive iteration in the, from, the dysfunctional elements of the Lazaris community, et cetera, became a net negative. And so I, looking around in an enormous amount of pain and frustration and ambivalence, what I started to do was, I wanted to give voice to all the frustration and kind of confusion and hypocrisy within the Lazaris community and the dysfunction. So I tried doing that with Jack. I thought about suing Jack, that's the channel. But ultimately it seemed like recreating and restoring well-being to my life was where I should put my attention. So I began focusing on that. But I also began doing some selective Lazaris techniques and meditations. Now, in this kind of 10, 11-year period of just, I'm not listening to any Lazaris tapes, and I'm mildly critical of a variety of things, about Lazaris's protocols and the impact in the community. At that point, I sold a bunch of about 2/3 of my Lazaris tapes, and just so that someone could maybe get some use and wouldn't be so bulky moving house. I was divided about that, and but I wanted to kind of restore some of the positive elements of that relationship with Lazaris, and also test its effectiveness in a highly traumatized, painful state. And that's when I started listening to the morning tape again. But it's also when Jack blocked communication, and so there was no effective voice to deal with these, very frustrating issues that I was dealing with. That generally had to do with the vastly overhyping of, what the New Age was about, what one could expect with using the Lazaris techniques and blah, blah, blah. I also discovered, a major source of scandal, just the amount of abuse going on between Concept Synergy or Jack and Penny and many of the staff, was quite high. And so I started a video series on YouTube called My Relationship with Lazaris, and basically covered in depth and articulated every criticism, every question, every doubt, every data point that was dissonant with the general presentation, that you and I understood in our teenage and 20s, right? That frankly did not come to manifest as I was or as you were expecting. Back when you're 14, 15, 16, 17, and Lazaris is talking about the new millennium and the new age and a world of dreams and a whole new human being and all of this type of stuff, you and I had some pretty rosy pictures of what post-millennium life would look like, right? Well, as I'm making this in 2023, I don't know that reality is better or worse. So on the good side, the Cold War has not, as of now, erupted into, nuclear winter, but or a third world war. But we're moving towards that with China and Russia simultaneously, right? The U.S. war machine is pushing and doing a little bit what it did in the Gulf of Tonkin with Vietnam, or in Iraq, where we, in 2001, we pretended as United States that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and we invaded and killed 1 million innocent Iraqi and became the weapon of mass destruction. We tormented any number of Iraqis, sexually abused them, set dogs on them, in gross violations of human rights. Then we've attacked Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, two of the whistleblowers of my period, in a really disgusting crackdown on free speech and journalism. So the new millennium, the wonderful, new age and all of that, not even close. So unfortunately for you, 90% disappointment in terms of painting those pictures. Is today, 2023, with a possible, there's a war going on in Ukraine and Russia, we're escalating tensions between Taiwan and China. The US dollar is rapidly losing credibility through, a variety of forms that have produced inflation. Is it better or worse than 1990, 1995, 2000, 2010? We've gone through several. We had a huge recession in 2008, which we paid the bankers that caused it big salaries to cover their asses, basically. But this kind of bullshit has been going on globally and personally for generations. Is today worse than, when you're a teenager, etc.? Now, I think it is worse in some ways. I think it is harder to have a romantic relationship. It's harder to make friends. There's more loneliness. People are more addicted to gadgets. And I would say I feel 3 times worse than I did 10, 20 years ago. So my body is worse. My mind is more anxious. I've got a lot more fight, flight from, the various traumas with that community I was speaking about and the therapeutic abuse of Peter Sandhill. I have more chronic. I have high levels of chronic fatigue. And so I would say the biggest thing is, but just to kind of complete that wave, some of the meditation, the morning meditation, working with self-esteem, and also the crisis tape and a few other tapes as well, have been medicinal, meaning my well-being goes up, particularly the morning meditation. It's a really fun meditation to do in the morning. And so what's my perspective looking back as someone that, having extensively, meaning I spent about 12 hours criticizing in depth every aspect of concept synergy, Jack, Penny, the community at large, and Lazaris as a channeled entity. And in doing so, somewhat vented the hurt, the disappointment, the frustration. Now, it is frustrating to be overhyped, to be overhyped. It is disappointing to, have great, plans laid out about this new age and all that, and feel that many things are worse, and whether or not they are worse overall, which I'm not sure that they are, they feel worse, is the way that I would say it. I feel 3 times worse than I did 20 years ago. And I felt pretty bad back then, right? And so that's not a great outcome, for spending thousands of hours and tens of thousands of dollars working with the Lazaris techniques. Now, the question is, so in review, is the net effect of a relationship with Lazaris better or worse than what? Than the alternatives? I think that the net effect of Lazaris is marginally above, positive. Let's say 10%. Like, there are negatives, there are positives, but let's say that the net effect is somewhere in the 10 to 20% bracket, right, of benefit. So good on you for spending a lot of time on something that had a net 20% benefit. So here's what I would do differently. The first thing that I would do differently is broaden my intake of information. Meaning Lazaris has such a big body of material that, having decided that there was some value there, we just went deeper and deeper and deeper and bought every tape and listened to it all, and that consumed a lot of time and a certain amount of money. But there are other perspectives. Now, I would put Lazaris in the top 10% of content creation, and so there's different perspectives, right? You did a good job learning how to start a business from Brian Tracy, for example. Learning about investing, would be another good area to start at a younger age. And being more critical of Lazaris, I think, would be liberating. The way I see it now is that Lazaris has a lot of good head knowledge, meaning there's not too much stuff that I think is wrong that Lazaris says. But I think it is deeply wrong for Lazaris to present this stuff in a lecture style without physical embodiment, without feedback loops, without data. Right? Lazaris has never once asked in the room for a raise of hands of people who have succeeded with any of his techniques, right? So a majority of Lazaris techniques, at least half of them, just haven't gone anywhere, haven't made much of a difference. And much of the well-being in my life has come from things outside of Lazaris. So I would say that in general, this is not just with Lazaris, be careful of self-referential loops. You go to a Lazaris event because you think it's good, or you wouldn't go, right? Who do you meet there? Other people who think it's good. You talk about them and they say, oh, this is the best, right? So you go to some more and you meet more people who think it's the best thing, right? And it just goes round and round. But what it's not referencing is how much time, money, and natural resources are being put into this compared to another group of people getting better results in this other way. And that was why it was such a shock to take workshops and make relationship breakthroughs that I couldn't make listening to the Lazaris material and with a Lazaris friend. So I had the best possible odds, an older woman with lots of experience with Lazaris and Lazaris techniques, believing in the Lazaris approach to practice Lazaris techniques with, that did absolutely nothing to improve our relationship. So that relationship ended. But part of the interesting dynamic, though, was, so I met this woman at a Lazaris workshop, which I wouldn't have done otherwise. She lived in Mill Valley, California. I was up in Washington State. It was more difficult for her to move her business than for me to move my business. So as a courtesy, I moved down here, where I still am, in order to save her the hassle of moving up there. Now, my income doubled as a result of moving into a wealthier county, right? So that, I'm sure, more than pays for all of the Lazaris crystals and tapes and all that. So, in other words, you have to look at the whole ecology. She was an older, more experienced woman and a relatively good person to explore some of my first romantic explorations with. So not bad, right? Could have done tremendously worse. Not bad, right? And so, I think the main advice I would give you is this. Let's say that 60% of what Lazaris says is overhyped, meaning it's an exaggeration of the effectiveness of the techniques, of how good the outcome will be, of when Lazaris talks about a whole new world, of what it actually feels like to be in that world and all of that. So that's the first thing I would just say in terms of framing. You don't know what Lazaris means, by all these wonderful, glowing words. But I have a sense of that now, having lived through this period and keep living, that there's a tremendous amount of just over-exaggeration of our definition of positive. Now, maybe this is the amazing new world in Lazaris's mind, right? That, that these are all wonderful things are unfolding and all that. Could be, but they're not wonderful in our mind, right? This is not a wonderful world as I see it or experience it. And so I don't think it will be a wonderful world as you experience it. I mean, it's not pleasant to have. I mean, there's also like waves of school shootings. That's up about 1,000% today, relative to I don't think school shootings were happening much post 2000. That's now every day almost. Some person is shooting other people in their school. So definitely, so what would I do? Well, first of all, I would prepare more. I would start preparing, making options and thinking about, like, for example, it's a tremendous relief to me to own land in Costa Rica and to know how to get a visa in Thailand or the Philippines. I'm currently married to a Filipina, right? Creating choices and investing in the future. That is something that I think is definitely a very solid move. But I would decrease the focus on Lazaris, and I would also increase the willingness to laugh and criticize the absurdity. Unfortunately, the amount of attachment trauma that you and I experience makes it very frightening to either have kind of power struggles with people, that's one thing, or to be in conflict. And so there is a lot of just turbulent energy around the community, the whole deal. I would generally say spend a little bit less money on crystals. If in doubt, put money or go traveling the world more rather than always going to a Lazaris event. That's one thing. Read, get an Audible download, get an Audible app as soon as that's available and start reading interesting books. Also, learn about the positive aspects of microdosing mushrooms. That would be something that I would explore very carefully and gently in your own way. Don't be pushed into that. That was one of my big mistakes, was being pushed into that. Peter Sandhill. So that's and so I would engage with Lazaris to the extent that it is more fun than anything else. Appreciate the gifts that are definitely to be had in that territory. And just understand that when Lazaris talks about, New World and stuff like that, he's talking about what seems to me to be a pretty painful, frustrating, often lonely world with a lot of anxiety and fear around all the changes that are happening. And I want you to take care of yourself. I want you to study, take care of yourself, and trust what you're seeing. Trust what makes sense to you. Let go of a lot of the create your own reality. I don't think that has ever had much benefit. You can influence your reality physiologically, emotionally, financially, logistically with your choices. Work towards a sense of worthiness through deep work. Understand that work also comes in waves, so that even if you do the techniques really well, they'll need to be done again in maybe 10 years, because a different wave of issues has come up, just like you can clean a window really well, and then dirt happens, and then you have to clean the window really well again, and dirt happens, and so I would be aware of that. The most important thing, though, I would say, is work with your body. Lazaris is terrible at somatic work, right? Massage, possibly doing, some martial art. Yoga is a generally good discipline. I'm not doing yoga at the moment. But when we have done yoga, that has been a really, good step towards our well-being. And just know that, whatever happens in that relationship with Lazaris, you're okay, right? The world didn't come to an end when, I published all of my criticisms and stuff. That was a load let down. There's good and bad in everything. Use your mind. You're very good at analyzing patterns and perceiving things. And, have trust in that, because that has led us generally in a good direction.